Hello, everyone. Really great to be here with all of you to talk about the power of storytelling. So as a quick introduction, really, I'm working for Lightful. Lightful is a technology company for social good and also a B Corp. And we're working with charities, foundations, community organizations to support them in any really technology requests. And as Lorna said, I'm the digital engagement manager at Lightful, so doing trainings, webinars on all things digital, communication, and storytelling. And I'm also running the Reclaim Social community. So today we're going to talk about storytelling, starting with the theory, really, what makes a good story, how to craft your own story, looking at some ideas, and how to look at more specifically on storytelling for funding. We'll explore some more ideas in terms of the different types of stories to tell, the things to consider when you're creating a story for funding, and also look at some examples. And of course, we'll have some time for Q&A in the end. So feel free to add any questions at the chat and we'll make sure we address them right after the session. So first of all, it would be good to start with a poll just to get an idea of where everyone is. Should be able to see that on your screen soon. So 2 questions. Which channels are you using to share your story? Just to get an understanding really of your favorite channels, if you use any of them. And the second question, how comfortable are you in sharing your organization's story? And we'll make sure we share the results once everyone votes.
Just have a few more votes to come in. Give people a few more moments and then I'll end the poll. Okay.
So in terms of the channels, Facebook is first. Almost all of you have used Facebook to share your story. Then we have Instagram, we have email. Some of you said the website. So it's really nice to see a couple of you on direct mail. It's really good to see all the different ways you can tell your story. And of course, that includes the different methods to be able to communicate your story on different channels. And in terms of the question, how comfortable you are in sharing your story. So there is a mix here. 5 of you said I want to get better at it. 4 said I'm very comfortable, and 3 slightly comfortable. So it's really nice to see a diverse audience, and hopefully will help you all in different ways. To be able to see the results. Perfect. So moving on, starting of course with the power of storytelling. So why do we think storytelling is important in general? So stories are everywhere. And if you think of it, they are the heart and soul of everything we do in terms of our projects and our work. And they also allow us to connect with others. So it's very important to be able to understand how you can really make the most of storytelling and how you can tell more effective and engaging stories in order to be able to communicate your message even better and get across the action that you want to achieve. So what makes a good story really? Of course, that's very subjective, but in general, when we think of a good story, it has to be, first of all, authentic. It needs to be relatable, and you need to connect with your audience, no matter who you want to target. But also you need to have it structured. So you need to have some sort of beginning, middle, end, and we'll mention more about that. You need to have context. Without context, you can really help someone to connect with you. And you also need to blend the emotion with the action. So it's great to appeal to someone, combine all the right emotions for their story, but you also need to have the action. You need to mix head and soul really, and make sure that everything is performed with really simple language. So no matter what kind of story you want to tell, you need to be able to connect with as many people as possible. So as we mentioned, every story, if you think of that, all sorts of stories have a structure, beginning, middle, and ending. So you start with thinking of the characters, the audience, the setting, then you present the journey, the challenges, and there needs to be an ending, a resolution, or some call to action. So if you think of that more practically, when you build a storyline, when you think of the arc, you can start by presenting a hook, something to grab someone's attention. Then you give an introduction, the character, the background, the context. And then you focus on the tension, the problems, the obstacles. How are you moving towards the story? And then, of course, you also want to focus on the resolution. How are you going to overcome the problems? What do you want to achieve? Or how do you envision the future? So pretty much when you put that into action, when you're thinking of crafting your own story and your own arc, it's good to remember that your story acts as your own narrative. So you could have multiple narratives based on the types of stories you want to tell, based on different use cases. But at the end of the day, you are the one owning your story. So you need to think of the continuity, as we said, beginning, middle, and end, and be able to answer in your story who is targeting, who are you going to reach, what are you going to communicate, why are you sharing that story, or when is this happening. So pretty much you want to present the need, the outcome, think of the better world. How are you going to tell a story to present the vision? What do you want to get with your organization? So if you want to work more on storytelling, we'll make sure we share this canvas. It's a storytelling canvas by Design a Better Business. And it's very useful because it's a really good exercise to start being better at storytelling. So as you can see on that, you start writing down, first of all, the subject. What's the story about? The goal. What do you want to achieve? The audience. Who do you want to reach? Who do you want to connect with? And then what we said, you build the arc. You start with setting the scene, make your point, get into the conclusion and the outcome, and then make sure you focus on the actions and the next steps. So feel free to try that out at your own time. It's a good exercise really to be better in storytelling. So now in terms of crafting the story and getting ready to be able to tell your story, it will be 3 steps, I'd say, in terms of the process. First of all, you want to prepare as much as possible, obviously. So you want to pick a theme. What would you like to talk about? Are there different themes that you want to use in your organization? Is there something specific you want to talk about? Then start organizing your content. What kind of story do you want to tell? Do you want to use specific images? For example, most of you said you're using Facebook. Do you want specific photos? Or what kind of content works for this story? And then you might want to think of the potential sources of storytelling. If you're talking about a specific project, about volunteers or someone else who might be involved, how can you make sure you involve them as early as possible to prepare the story and everything you need to have ready? Then the second stage is about planning. So who do you want to reach? Think of your audience, think what you want to achieve. And that's again, very useful if you work with that canvas as an exercise. Think of your objectives and decide the channels that you want to use so that you are as organized as possible before you actually tell your story. So then the last stage is to actually create the story and be able to share it. So you want to focus on the structure and think, as we said, beginning, middle, and end. What do you want to achieve? How are you going to present the story? Focus on the action. So when is the right time to make the ask? What are the next steps? And what would you like to get out of that? What would you like your audience to get out of your story? And as we said, focus on the outcome. Every story has to have a very clear ending in terms of the solution, the vision, or what you want to get out of this. So for example, if we think of storytelling for social change, you need to work on your narrative, which is what we described right now, on knowing what you want to communicate, but you also want to inspire action. So ideally, you want to have a good mix between the two so that you know how to tell your story, but you also want to make it actionable so that others are inspired and they instantly feel that they want to find out more and they want to help you. So when we're talking about funding, obviously you need to have your narrative. You need to inspire action, any outcome that you feel is ideal for you. But you also need to consider, what do the founders want? So if there's a specific founder, is there something that you want to adapt in your pitch? If you're submitting a general pitch, how does that make it more appealing really for any founder in a specific field? And what do you really need to consider when you're thinking specifically on storytelling for funding? So in that case, there are 3 questions to consider when you create stories for storytelling for funding. First of all, it's good to think, why is your work important? So before you talk about your story, you want to be able to present your mission, to know that you're the one who knows better than anyone else your mission and what your organization is working on. You want to be able to present your work through storytelling. So think again of the narrative. How are you going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to present your work to others? And then you want to use your narrative to make your story come to life, to make it more appealing. And think how, again, you want to engage others to make it convincing enough to want to find out more. This is the first step. Then the second step, you want to obviously think of the audience that you want to target. So what do people in your community need? That's part of the story. And you want to present those you are helping. So this is very important part of the project, obviously, when it comes to storytelling for funding. It's good to make it personal, to focus on more examples, add more details, and try to show in more detail, really, as much as possible. How do you envision your project? What would you like to achieve? And how are you really thinking for going from one step to another? And this is, again, the third step, thinking of the problem. And you also need to have the solution. So you want to make it easy for your founders to know how you're making a difference. You want to present the story in a way that is simple, structured, but it's also very easy for them to understand what you want to make out of the story and, of course, the funding. So make sure you focus on the action, make it easy to follow and easy to connect in terms of getting the desired results. So more specifically, if you're thinking of telling a story through Action Founder, there are three main questions in terms of building the arc of your story. The first question is, what's the problem? This is the part where you describe more of the situation, where you are right now, and then you're presenting the solution. So the second question is, this is what I want to achieve. This is how I imagine the outcome. And these are the steps that I want to follow to go from the problem to the solution. And then the third question, which is also very important, and it's really useful to be able to understand that part, is why are you the best place to deliver the solution? So this is the part where it gets you to really own your own story and be able to convince everyone that you are the right one to deliver this solution. So this is very useful, as we said, to connect with the founder and the audience, to be able to share more details, to add more context, and prove that your story is really making sense from one step to another, and that in very simple and structured way, you make it easy for someone to follow you. So some tips to consider when you're crafting a story or your next pitch. Make sure that your story is actionable and comprehensive. As we said, making sure you move from one step to another in a very easy and smooth way. Make sure you use simple language. No matter who you're targeting, it's always good to have very simple language, very actionable and easy to follow. Always present the problem you're trying to solve. So make sure you focus on the problem and then you present the outcome. Think how you can organize your stories later on. For example, you wrote a pitch right now. It might have been for a specific founder or a general one. It's good to keep them organized for future use. Instead of starting a pitch from scratch next time, let's say in a few months' time or even in a year, it's good to have a starting point. So organize them all. It might be a document, a folder, everything that you've written down, different stories, and adapt them accordingly. So you can review them anytime that you want. If you had progress on your project, or if there was a change, it's good to have a starting point. And then obviously, when we're talking about funding, it's good to focus on what the funder wants to see. You want to be able to be convincing with your story that you are the right person to pretty much take on the problem and tackle the solution. So when we're thinking of storytelling, and that's why we asked earlier about different channels, thinking beyond the funding in general, your stories can be part of different channels. And of course, every channel has different needs and different formats and different types of content to tell your story. Obviously, the first option would be your website. If you have a site to present your story, your mission, it's a great way to add more details about your organization, how you've started, how the project is continuing, and how someone can really find out more about you. So this is also an easy way to connect that with action, how they can support you, how they can follow you on social media, or just connect with you in different ways. So if someone finds you on social media, then the storytelling is different. It's more creative. It's probably more visual. You have more videos, more photos. And of course, it's important when we're talking about social media. For example, Instagram is different than Twitter. The one is more visual, the other one is more short form content. So different channels have different types of content and different audiences. So in that case, the story could be different based on the one you're presenting on your website. And you could still have the same starting point, but you can still adjust it based on the channel that you're using. Then some of you mentioned that you're using email and newsletters in a sense of telling a story, and you can share updates if you want to use email. You can keep your audience up to date, your volunteers, those who support your project. And it's also a great way to inspire action. It's probably easier with email than social media to get someone, once they open the email, to pay more attention. So you can add longer content, you can direct them to your website, or just get them to read more about you. So it could be long form content, or it could just be a short story to share some updates from you. And then video is also really important and a really great way to tell your story. Most of the time when we're talking about storytelling, we just assume it's in written form, especially when we want to create a pitch. But actually, it's a really great way to think of video pitches and actually short form content, because it's a really great way for someone to get your project to come to life. So for example, on Action Founder, you can just submit a written pitch, but you can also submit a video. So in 60 seconds or 90 seconds, you can just present a story that could be more convincing than spending hours, for example, writing an actual pitch. So that makes it more important to be able to tell a story, because obviously if you want to use 90 seconds to tell your story and convince the founders, then you want to really focus on the structure. You want to have a very practical and actionable story, but it makes it also easier to connect with others. It's easier for someone to just feel that they understand more of your journey, your process, and how you envision the change. So if you haven't really tried that up to now, it might be a good idea and good exercise to try out the video form of pitch for your next funding. And just some examples really to give you more inspiration in terms of different uses of stories and how they're really everywhere. So storytelling on social media is very common. And I really like the option of being able to tell a story in many different posts. So it's not necessarily just one post and you're done with the story. You can have many different posts in a sense that you have the continuity and someone can just follow your profile and find out more different stories in multiple posts. This is an example of sharing a behind the scenes story. So it's really common to share stories from your team, your volunteers, how you're working on a project. You might want to share updates. So this is a great way to tell a story because it really helps you to connect with your audience. It gives them an idea of your project, on how you're working, and it's also a good reminder for them to know what you're working on and what you've achieved up to now. This is an example of sharing stories of impact, and that's obviously very important to be able to combine storytelling with impact. It's a nice way to share what you've done up to now and what you want to achieve next. Focus on the numbers, you can focus on your team, thank your volunteers, everyone who really is part of your project. And of course, social media is great in terms of sharing such images, thanking them for the support, and also remind them of the next steps. It's not just about what you have achieved. You also want to focus on what's next and how they can support you in the future. And something that we also hear quite a lot in terms of storytelling training, there are many cases when you have to tackle sensitive topics based on different causes that you're working on. It's not always easy to just highlight the beneficiaries, really. So when we're talking about sensitive topics, there is the challenge that you have more limited ways of tell a story, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't tell a story. We've seen many cases of charities, well, might have been around homelessness, abuse issues in terms of like someone feeling scared to even talk. And in that case, you might want to play around with quotes, with illustrations. An example like this one, where you're just showing the back of someone instead of necessarily showing any faces or adding any names. But it's just a reminder that even on sensitive topics and really challenging causes, there's always a way to tell a story. You might need to be more creative, but it's still a way to be able to tell your story. And these are just a few more reminders in terms of being able to use emotions in your story, which are very important, but you also need to be able to direct to some action. So if you want to tell a story through video, as we've said, it's great to be able to share the right emotions, to connect with your audience, but you also need to have some sort of action in the end. You don't want to just having someone to appreciate your story and then just lose interest. They need to connect enough to be able to follow the next steps. It could be on visiting your website, on following you on social media, or any sort of action that you feel it's important for the next steps. And then the last bit for today, just in general, when we're talking about storytelling, it's important to start thinking that stories are actually everywhere. It's more about cultivating a storytelling mindset, if it's just with you or anyone else in your team and everyone working with you, and start thinking, how can you plan, collect, and organize them? So for example, in terms of planning, you might want to think, is there a potential story coming up? Could I find an opportunity within my team to get new stories to share? Or how can I get the volunteers or anyone working with me, any partners, to tell their own story, their own point of view? And try to collect all of them. You can use a document, a folder, just collecting all the different materials you might have. It could be a testimonial. It could be someone working with you and sharing more about the project. So get all those collected in one place, and that really saves you time in the future when you want to talk about something specific. So then when you organize them, you might also think of the materials, any themes, any way that you can just keep them all handy for the next time you want to use the story. It could be for funding, could be for your social media channels, or even your website. So definitely helps to save time and organize your stories as much as possible. So that was pretty much the quick introduction really to storytelling and just some ideas for storytelling for funding. And feel free to ask any questions you might have, either for me or the Action Founder team.
I think there was something in the chat that came in from Brenda. Brenda, would you like to come off mute and ask? Sorry, putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, when you fill out an application form for funding, there are lots of boxes that you've got to fill out. Whereabouts in that application could you present a story? Because that's what I feel it should be presented in an application form, in a story-like way would be brilliant. But there doesn't appear to be any facility on those particular documents to be able to present it.
So the story could be part, for example, the part where you talk about your mission, how you started, or how you envision your project to continue. It doesn't have to be a specific field when you just present the story. I think it's more about the idea that when you're making a case for funding, for example, it doesn't have to be a very predictable, boring, dry text, which is sometimes the case with grant writing. It's just thinking more creatively. How can I convince them through a story instead of just presenting 1, 2, 3, to take them on a journey?
Yeah, I do find 1, 2, 3 is very, very repetitive. So,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, it depends on the case. Sometimes someone might just appreciate 1, 2, 3 because it really works. But if there is a place where you feel that actually I feel it would be easier to connect with them and get them to understand what my project is about or what my vision is. So in the vision, for example, you could share more about a specific example. Or I think this would help because this is the journey that you're taking them on a story. As we said, building the arc. This is the problem, this is the solution, and this is why I feel I'm the right one to overcome it. So it doesn't have to be a very different and very creative story. It's more about having the structure to be able to convince them and get them to understand that you're following some steps.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions on the various different digital channels available or funding applications and the ways in which you can tell your story through them or attract funding, not just through grant applications, but other means? as we all know, getting funding in for projects takes a hustle. It takes a whole variety of different funding streams. So if there are any questions on the different platforms available to Storytell and how those can support you in your funding journey, you have these invaluable moments with Teresa now. Do post them.
I think what I've noticed from my own experience, usually with storytelling, and when you try to organize your content in these cases, is the more organized you are, which is always very challenging, of course, to remember that, is the easier it becomes afterwards. Because obviously, once you feel more, create more pitches, you get more grants, then it becomes challenging to start from scratch. So it's always good to start, organize yourself as much as possible. Keep different stories, different things about your organization in one place.
Absolutely, and great to see from Jojo there that it's really useful to link the resolution with the action, and really great to have that pointed out.
Yeah, we tend to forget that, but if you think of that, even when we read stories on our own and content, when you actually have the resolution in the end, the outcome, it always makes more sense for you. So instantly when you read that or you watch a video, you realize that they really know what they're talking about. They imagined the outcome and they have a clear structure.
Yeah, for sure. There's a good point from Sarah in here about how much harder it is to write succinctly
on that.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, it is very hard.
That definitely makes it challenging. It's not easy, and I always have that struggle on the limit of words.
It calls for even more structure and organization, right, Teresa?
Well, you can tell a very long story in that case, but you still need to remember to cover the resolution.
Brilliant. Well, if you have any other questions that come up, then do let us know by email. We're happy to answer at hello@actionfunder.org. And we'll be putting Teresa's social media handles into the follow-up email, so you can keep abreast of future workshops that Teresa will be running, and reach out to her there too. Thank you so much, Teresa. It's been really brilliant, info-packed half hour that was. And as we said at the start, we'll be sending around a recording of the session by email this week, latest next week. In there, you'll get the recording, you'll get Teresa's social handles, contact details. And we'll be holding another Action Funder workshop next Tuesday. And that'll be all about the funder's language, speaking the funder's language, kind of jargon busting info to help you on your funding journey. So look out for details of that in the follow-up email, and you might even get a link in the chat from Kia, who is busy putting a lot of things into the chat there. You also have a link there to Action Funder. For those of you who haven't yet signed up, do go over there and do so. There are funds launching every week, and there are links there in the chat to the ones that have already launched in Bristol, London and Oxford, and in Brent Cross Town in London as well. They are live, so do head over there and have a look. And yeah, as I said, any other questions, hello@actionfunder.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you're all heading out to a nice peaceful evening in the hot sunshine. I know that where I am, it's looking very blue sky out the window, and I'm looking forward to getting out there with a cool drink. So final thank you to Teresa, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Lorna.
Thanks so much. There are always a few people at the end that need to be just gently put into the waiting room. There we go. All right, thanks so much, Teresa. That was brilliant.
Thanks a lot. It's nice.
That was great.
Really good.
Thanks.
How did you find it?
It was good. Yeah, it felt pretty quick. It's
yeah,
covering, but it felt very quick.
Half an hour is quick, right?
Nice.
You definitely don't have much of an opportunity to kind of get very creative
No, it's way better this way rather than very long
Yeah.
sessions really for everyone.
Yeah, I think so. We've had good feedback about keeping it short and snappy and info
Yeah, yeah.
packed. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed
know.
that. Don't know about you, Keir, but
Yeah, it
I
was great.
lapping up that information. And do send over, as we said before, any info that you want to include in the follow-up.
Yeah.
And are you happy for us to put the session up on
Yeah,
YouTube?
feel free. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I think that's us. Is there anything we need to talk about before we head off?
I think so. Good.